One of the most important properties that you must set for any component is the name property. In this lesson, we will look at naming your components. You will learn the rules that apply when naming your components. We will also explore how names are assigned by using conventions to make our names consistent and to make it easy to identify components. Then we will apply the naming rules and conventions to the components we added in the graphical user interface that we created in lesson 11. Let's start by looking at naming rules. Rules may not be violated. You must follow the naming rules to the T. If you don't, Delphi will complain and you will get errors. The first rule. When naming a component, the name must be without spaces. In other words, the name must be one word. In the previous lesson, we added a label and an edit for the first name field. We changed the label's caption property to the words first name, and we removed the text from the edit. The caption of the label is not the name of the label. It is the text that your users must see on the label. Therefore, it can have spaces between the words like first name, with a space between the words. However, when you name the label, you cannot type a space between any of the characters or words. The name, first name, with a space between the words will produce an error. The correct way is to assign the name like first name without a space. The second rule. Your components' names must be unique. You cannot have two components with the same name. For example, the label will indicate to the user that a first name is required, and the edit next to it allows the user to enter a first name. Because both these components have something to do with the user's first name, it is only natural to call them both first name. However, that will confuse Delphi. Later, when you learn how to write code, you will see that Delphi must reference a component by its name, and the compiler will not know which components to reference if you have duplicate names. When naming the label and the edit in our example, you must rather use names like first name label and first name edit. I know that this looks funny at the moment, but hang on for a while. You will see that the names that we use here evolve into something more meaningful. Let's look at the third rule. Your components' names cannot start with a number. The first character in the name must be an alphabetical character. Therefore, you cannot call the label first name label with a 1 in the front. Rather, type the first name label out in alphabetical characters. The same applies for the first name edit or any other component. The fourth rule. Your components' names cannot contain special characters. Characters and symbols like $, hash, exclamation mark, question mark, ampersand, percentage, asterisk, hyphen, and so on will not be accepted. Delphi will produce errors if you include them in the names of your components. However, you may use the underscore character in names, but it is not really necessary because there are better ways. Instead of using all these funny characters, stick with a simple name. Use normal alphabetic characters like first name label. Let's now look at naming convention. Unlike rules, a convention is not important to Delphi. So, if you do not follow a naming convention, Delphi will not complain or produce errors. However, a naming convention is very important for you, your teacher, or if you work in a programming team, it is important for your teammates. A naming convention makes our programs and our code consistent and easy to read. It also helps us to easily identify our components in code. You will normally use a convention that is also used by teammates, or a convention that is dictated by your school or college. A naming convention is like a protocol that helps us to name components in a way that other people also name their components. It is a conventional way of naming your stuff. Let me explain that with an analogy. After you were born, your parents had to name you. Your name was registered and your parents received a birth certificate made out in your name. When your parents decided on a name, they used a naming convention. In some traditions or cultures, the name that you get is also the name of another family member, like the name of one of your parents or a grandparent. In some traditions or cultures, you also get a middle name or even a string of names to honor more than one family member. Or maybe because the parents hope that the child will one day inherit from all the uncles and aunts. It doesn't matter how many names you have, but all of us also have one surname or family name on our birth certificates. So the conventional way is to give at least a first name and a surname to a child. I also did that when I explained the rules. I called my label first name and I gave it a surname or family name called label because it belongs to the label family. The full name of the label is therefore first name label, and because I'm not allowed to use a space, I make the name and the family name one word. When assigning a name, it must be meaningful. It must describe the purpose of the component. For example, by calling an edit first name edit, I immediately know that I'm working with an edit component, and I know that it will receive a first name as input. Try to avoid cryptic names, abbreviated names, or meaningless names. If you are a boy, you wouldn't like it if your parents gave you a girl's name, would you? Or even worse, do you think anybody will vote for a politician if his surname is Loser? Let's look at another example. We added a postal code label and a postal code edit in the previous lesson. Let's apply the naming rules that we learned earlier, and then we will also apply a popular naming convention. To name the postal code label or edit, we are not allowed to use a space, so we must make the name one word. But we know now that we cannot assign the name to both the label and the edit. We learned that the component's name must be unique, and by assigning a family name or surname, we can make it unique. But let's first look at the convention used by millions of programmers and software developers all over the world. It is called the Hungarian naming convention. With the Hungarian naming convention, your components' names must be in camel case. It works like this. If a name consists of only one word, like age, then all the characters are in lowercase. If the name consists of more than one word, like the name Postal Code, then all the characters in the first part of the name are in lowercase, like the word postal. Every part or word after that starts with an uppercase character, like the word code starts with a capital C. Secondly, when the Hungarian people introduce themselves, they first use their surnames and then their first names. For example, 007 introduces himself by saying, "I'm Bond, James Bond." But if he was Hungarian, he would say, "I'm Bond, Bond James." Now with that in mind, let's see how we must name the labels and edit components for postal code. Instead of calling the label by its name and then its surname, like postal code label, we must also reverse the name and family name like the Hungarians do. The label will then be called label postal code, and the edit's name will be edit postal code. But the conventional practice in programming is to abbreviate the family name into a 3-letter prefix. So the label's name will then be LBL postal code, and the edit will be called EDT postal code. Let's summarize and see how the Hungarian naming convention helps us to make names easier to read. Firstly, the prefix immediately indicates to us what type of component we are working with. Later, this becomes important when you have to reference components in code. Secondly, the 3-letter prefix forms the first part of the name. Therefore, all the characters in the prefix is in lowercase, and every word after the prefix starts with an uppercase. Thirdly, because we use uppercase characters for every word that follows the prefix, we do not need special characters like hyphens and underscores. The uppercase character makes it easy enough to read multi-part names. Finally, because we use a prefix to indicate what type of component we are working with, we can have more than one component with the same description as long as the prefix is different. The Hungarian naming convention provides prefixes for all the components in Delphi. So let's now look at some prefixes for the components that we will use in this lesson and in future lessons. Here we see the contact information program that we created in the previous lesson. I will list the types of components that we added on this form, and I will also show you an example of the prefixes and typical names that will be suitable for some of the components. Let's start with the form. In our program, the form is used to get contact information from a user. So a suitable name for it will be FRM Contact Information. We added 5 panels on the form. A panel's prefix is PNL. A suitable name for the panel that displays the header will therefore be something like PNL Header. We added a few labels in some of the panels. A label's prefix is LBL. For example, a suitable name for the first name label will be LBL First Name. We also added many edits. An edit's prefix is EDT. The edit that will be used to get the postal code will therefore be named EDT Postal Code. I've seen a few different prefixes used for combo boxes. The most popular one is CBO, therefore a suitable name for the gender combo box will be CBO gender. The prefix for a spin edit is SED, so we will call our age spin edit SED age. The image that displays a photo will be named IMG photo. The checkbox in the contact details panel will be called CBX send newsletter. In the actions panel we added a normal button component that will be used to display output. The prefix for a button is BTN, so a suitable name for it will be BTN display. We also added two bitmap buttons. The prefix for a bitmap button is BMB, so the bitmap button that will reset all our values will be named BMB reset. On the bottom of the form we added a memo component. A suitable name for the memo is MEM information because it will be used to display the information to the user. Some other components that we haven't used but that we will see in later lessons are the shapes, radio buttons, rich edits and timers. A radio button's prefix is RAD, like RAD payment method. A shape's prefix is SHP, for example SHP rectangle. A rich edits prefix is RED, like RED output. And the timer's prefix is TMR, for example TMR clock. Before we move on, just pause the video and look at the list again. Write down the types of components and their prefixes and memorize it. Notice that the prefixes only have lowercase characters. Also notice that the first character of every word after the prefix is an uppercase character. Finally, notice that all the names describe the type of component as well as the purpose of each component. Now let's move on. Let's go and give names to the components that we added in the previous lesson. I will open the program from the folder that I created on my desktop. I'm sure that you are now familiar with this routine, so I'll just go ahead and search for the Delphi project file and then I double click on it to open the project in Delphi's IDE. Click on the Forms title bar to make it visible. Now let's name the components. You can select the components by clicking on them, but to make sure I name all my components, I prefer to select them in the Object Tree view. See how the components get focus as I'm changing the selections in the Object Tree view. Remember, the handles indicates to me which component is selected. The first component that I name is the form, so I select Form 1 in the Object Tree view, then I go to the Object Inspector, scroll to the name property and I change it to FRM contact information. Notice how the name also changes in the Object Tree view. Now I just continue with the list from top to bottom. The next component's default name is Memo1. Select its name in the Object Tree view and the memo that must display information is now selected. Go to its name property and change it to MEM information. Next, select panel 1. That is the header panel. Go to the name property and change it to P&L header. Select panel 2. It is the personal information panel. Change the name of this panel to P&L personal information. Select panel 3. It is the address information panel. Change the name of this panel to P&L address information. Select panel 4. It is the contact details panel. Change the name of this panel to P&L contact details. Select panel 5. It is the Actions panel. Change the name of this panel to P&L Actions. Okay, all our panels have names now. Next to each panel, except for the header, you can see a little plus symbol. This indicates to us that the panel contains one or more child components. Click on the plus next to the panel called P&L Actions to view a list of its children. Click on bit button 1 to select it. The Close Bitmap button is now selected. Scroll to the name property and change it to BMB Close. Now select bit button 2 in the Object Tree view. This is the Reset Bitmap button. Scroll to its name property and change it to BMB Reset. Select a component called Button 1 to select the Display button and change its name to BTN Display. Now click on the plus sign next to P&L address information to display the list of components it contains. Click on Edit 3 to select the Street edit and change its name property to EDT Street. Click on Edit 4 to select the City edit and change its name property to EDT City. Click on Edit 5 to select the Country edit and change its name property to EDT Country. Click on Edit 6 to select the Postal Code edit and change its name property to EDT Postal Code. Click on Label 5 to select the Street label and change its name property to LBL Street. Click on Label 6 to select the City label and change its name property to LBL City. Click on Label 7 to select the Country label and change its name property to LBL Country. Click on Label 8 to select the Postal Code label and change its name property to LBL Postal Code. Now click on the plus next to P&L contact details to display the list of components it contains. Click on checkbox 1 to select the Send Newsletter checkbox and change its name property to CBX Newsletter. Click on Edit 7 to select the Telephone edit and change its name property to EDT Telephone. Click on Edit 8 to select the Email edit and change its name property to EDT Email. Click on Label 10 to select the Email label and change its name property to LBL Email. Click on Label 9 to select the Telephone label and change its name property to LBL Telephone. Now, click on the plus sign next to P&L Personal Information to display the list of components it contains. Click on Combo Box 1 to select the Gender combo box and change its name property to CBO Gender. Click on Edit 1 to select the First Name edit and change its name property to EDT First Name. Click on Edit 2 to select the Surname edit and change its name property to EDT Surname. Click on Image 1 to select the photo and change its name property to IMG Photo. Click on Label 1 to select the First Name label and change its name property to LBL First Name. Click on Label 2 to select the Surname label and change its name property to LBL Surname. Click on Label 3 to select the Gender label and change its name property to LBL Gender. Click on Label 4 to select the Age label and change its name property to LBL Age. Click on Spin Edit 1 to select the Age Spin Edit and change its name property to SED Age. Now, to make sure that all your components have proper names, just scan the components' names in the Object Tree view. Good, all my components have descriptive names. To make sure that everything is still hunky-dory, I will run my program, and if Delphi doesn't complain, I'm also happy. There you can see now, I didn't get any errors. Close the form and click the Save button in the speed bar to make sure you persist all your changes. And that's it. Now that you named all your components, your program is ready for code. In lesson 13, I will ask you to create 4 new graphical user interfaces on your own. I will show you how the GUIs must look and which properties you must set. You must create all 4 applications because you will use them in later lessons. So I'll talk to you again in the next video.